He put down his tools and took off my guard. It was supposed to be just another afternoon, the kind you don't remember, the kind where nothing extraordinary happens, the kind where a repairman shows up, fixes what's broken, and leaves. Except this time, he didn't just fix the leak under my sink. He broke open something in me I didn't even know was cracked. My name is Lydia, and I had been married for 10 years. 10 quiet years. No big fights, no fireworks, just the slow erosion of connection. My husband David worked long hours. Our conversations had become transactional, our touch routine, our marriage silent. So when the dishwasher started leaking, it wasn't even David who noticed, it was me wiping up another puddle while he stared at his phone. I made the call, set the appointment, forgot about it. Until he showed up, dressed in worn jeans and a navy utility shirt with his name stitched in cursive mark. His hands were rough, his voice calm. And when he stepped into my kitchen, it was like the air shifted, not because he was particularly handsome, not in the classic way, but because he looked at me, really looked at me, like I mattered, like I wasn't invisible. He knelt down with his tools, opened the cabinet, and started working. I went about my day pretending I didn't feel his presence filling the room. But when I offered him water and his fingers grazed mine, that tiny touch sparked something that had been dormant for years. I should have walked away. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. Because in that moment, as he set his equipment aside and stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, I saw it in his eyes, something more than politeness, something unspoken, and everything that happened after changed my life forever. He put down his equipment and started something I never saw coming. A true infidelity story. The moment he stood up, something shifted. His eyes lingered for a second too long. Or maybe it was mine. Maybe I was the one who stared first. I don't remember. But I do remember the way the air felt suddenly thicker, heavier, like a pause in a conversation you weren't expecting to have. Mark gave a small, polite smile. All done under here. The leak was from the connection valve. I tightened it and replaced the washer, should be good now. His voice was steady, professional, but the way he looked at me didn't feel professional at all. Thank you, I said. I really appreciate it. No problem, he replied, then wiped his hands again and stood still like he was waiting for something, maybe a signature, maybe a goodbye, maybe anything else. The silence between us stretched. Would you like some coffee? I heard myself ask. Why did I say that I wasn't even sure if I meant it as just coffee? Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But Mark hesitated only for a second before answering, Sure, I've got a few minutes. A few minutes. That's all it took to begin the unraveling of a marriage. I walked to the kitchen counter, pulling down 2 mugs with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. I could feel him watching me. Not in a predatory way. It was softer than that. Curious. Quiet. Like he was reading a page I hadn't meant to leave open. I hope you don't mind, Strong, I said. Not at all, he replied, stepping closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him. I handed him a cup, and our fingers touched again. This time we didn't look away. We stood there, me in my kitchen, him holding a chipped white mug, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt wanted, seen, alive. You live here alone? He asked, glancing around. I shook my head. No. My husband's around. Just busy, always working. He nodded slowly, sipping the coffee. That's tough. It is. I said, not knowing why I was telling him that, not knowing why it felt like the truth needed to come out of me before I exploded. I've been married, he said after a pause. Didn't last. I raised an eyebrow. Why? She stopped talking to me. I stopped noticing. One day we both realized we were strangers living in the same house. That line hit me harder than I expected. That's exactly how it feels, I whispered more to myself than to him. He leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on mine. Doesn't have to. I set my cup down. What do you mean? He shrugged, but the intensity in his gaze didn't match the casual movement. I mean, Sometimes you don't realize how alone you've felt until someone else makes you feel something different. The words echoed inside me like a stone dropped into water, rippling, expanding, disturbing everything I had kept still for so long. I shouldn't feel this way, I said. He didn't say anything, and maybe that's why I kept going. I don't even know you. And yet, you feel something, he finished. Yes. His eyes flicked to my lips, then back to my eyes. So do I. The moment that followed didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a surrender, like something pulling us toward each other that neither of us had the strength or the will to resist. He reached out, slow, deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was gentle, respectful, but it still made my heart stutter. "You're beautiful," he whispered. I didn't answer, because no one had said that to me in years, and for some reason hearing it now from him felt like oxygen. I stepped closer. We stood inches apart. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator. The silence between us was louder than either of them. Then I kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't careful. It was soft, tender, a whisper of longing that had waited too long to be spoken. He kissed me back. And in that moment, I forgot everything my husband, the years of loneliness, the woman I had become, in the quiet spaces of disappointment. All I could feel was the now, the heat, the hands at my waist, the lips that trembled with restraint. But just as quickly, I pulled back. "I'm sorry," I said, breathless. "I shouldn't." He placed a hand gently on my arm. "Don't apologize. I get it. But I don't want to be the thing you regret. I don't think I will," I admitted quietly. He stayed a moment longer, eyes filled with something I couldn't name, respect maybe, or restraint. Then he nodded. "I should go." I nodded too, but a part of me didn't want him to. He walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Lydia, if you ever need anything at all." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He left. And I stood there in my kitchen, the scent of coffee and sweat and something new still lingering in the air. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt, but because my heart wouldn't stop racing. My thoughts kept looping back to his hands, his words, the warmth in his voice when he said my name like it mattered. The next day, I found myself opening the dishwasher, staring at the work he had done like it held some secret. I touched the wrench he'd left behind and realized I wasn't ready to let go of that moment. Not yet. Not ever. He put down his equipment and started something I never saw coming, a true infidelity story. The wrench sat on the edge of the counter for 2 full days. I told myself I'd call Mark to return it, that it was just common courtesy, that it had nothing to do with what happened between us. But every time I reached for my phone, I hesitated. Because the truth was, it wasn't about the wrench. It was about the moment I didn't want to forget. I wasn't proud of what I felt, but I wasn't ashamed either. I had spent years being invisible in my own home. My thoughts unacknowledged, my affection dismissed, my presence tolerated. Mark looked at me for 10 minutes and somehow managed to undo all of that. On the 3rd day, I sent the text. "Hi, you left your wrench here. Do you want to swing by and pick it up sometime?" He responded within 5 minutes. "Mark, sure. Tomorrow around 1. I stared at the screen for a long time. I'll be here. The next morning I cleaned the house without realizing it, wiped the countertops, lit a candle, changed my blouse. Not too dressy, not too casual, just careful. My hands shook a little as I poured myself a glass of water and set the wrench on the counter like it was something sacred. At exactly 1:03 p.m., the doorbell rang. Mark stood on the porch, same jeans, same utility shirt, but this time he carried nothing, except that same look in his eyes. I opened the door without a word. He stepped in. I closed it behind him. We stood there in the quiet for a few seconds, both of us unsure what came next. The wrench was on the counter, obvious and deliberate. "You didn't have to bring it," he said, his voice low. "I know," I replied, "but maybe I wanted to see you." He stepped closer, closing the space between us with a tension so thick it felt almost unbearable. I thought about you, he said softly. I swallowed. Me too. Then it happened again. The kiss. But this time it wasn't tentative. It was certain. It was fire. His hands slid around my waist. My arms found their way around his neck, and we didn't stop. Not even to think. Not even to breathe. We moved through the kitchen like it was familiar territory, like we'd been here before. He pressed me against the counter, our mouths still tangled, the tension rising with every heartbeat. I shouldn't be doing this, I whispered between kisses. Neither should I, he said, brushing his lips across my jaw. But I don't want to stop. Then don't, I said. And he didn't. He lifted me onto the counter, his hands running along my thighs, his breath warm against my neck. Every second felt like borrowed time, every movement a rebellion. But I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. Because the ache in me was louder than the guilt, and for once I wanted to choose myself, not duty, not the script I'd been handed, but desire, warmth, aliveness. What happened next wasn't rushed, it wasn't careless, it was slow, purposeful. We undressed each other like we were revealing confessions. His hands trembled just slightly as he touched me, as if he couldn't believe I was real, and mine shook too. Because this wasn't just lust, it was release. It was decades of silence finally breaking. We made love right there in the kitchen. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't choreographed. It was raw, honest, a gasp against a neck, a hand gripping too tight, a sigh that said everything I hadn't dared say out loud. And when it was over, when I lay against his chest, skin flushed and heart pounding, I realized something that terrified me more than anything. I didn't regret it, not even a little. He held me close for a long time. No words, just warmth and breath and the stillness of a moment suspended between two people who knew they'd crossed a line and weren't ready to go back. Eventually he pulled back, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Are you?" He gave a soft smile. "Yeah, just didn't expect all of this." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Me neither. We sat at the kitchen table after drinking water like two people who had run a marathon. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was comforting. Easy. "I don't want to be a mistake," he said quietly. "You're not," I replied without hesitation. "But I don't know what this is." "Maybe you don't have to," he said. "Not yet." We agreed to take it slow. But we both knew that was a lie. Because once something like this starts, it doesn't slow. It grows. The next week we met again. Then again. Sometimes at my house, sometimes in his truck parked behind the old greenhouse on the edge of town. Every meeting brought new risks, deeper emotions, more intense desire. But it also brought peace. It brought clarity. It brought back the version of myself I thought I had lost, buried beneath years of being unchosen. He listened when I spoke. He held me when I cried. He laughed at my jokes. He noticed when I cut my hair, when I wore a new blouse, when I felt off. Little things my husband hadn't acknowledged in years. But the guilt, it still crept in. One night as I lay in bed beside David, his back turned, already asleep, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself the question that haunted me most. What does it mean if I feel more with a stranger in 3 weeks than I have with my husband in 3 years? And then a deeper question followed. If you have to break something to feel alive again, was it already broken? He put down his equipment and started something I never saw coming, a true infidelity story. It was a Wednesday when the weight of it all began to cave in. Mark had just left. Another quiet afternoon turned into stolen kisses, tangled limbs, whispered promises. He had traced every part of me with his fingers and asked nothing in return but the truth. And for the first time in years, I had given it freely, breathlessly, without fear. But that night, as I sat at the dinner table across from David, watching him scroll through his phone, the reality of my double life hit me like a wave. The guilt I had shoved into the back of my mind suddenly demanded to be heard. "Did you pick up the dry cleaning?" he asked, not even looking up. "No," I replied. "I forgot." He sighed, just barely. "Figures." There was no fight, no outburst, just indifference. And somehow that stung more than any accusation could have, because in that moment I realized we weren't even pretending anymore. We were two strangers surviving under the same roof, ghosts in a house that used to be alive. That night I lay in bed with my back to him, staring at the wall. I remembered how Mark had held me just hours earlier, how he had kissed my shoulder like it meant something, how he had said my name like it mattered. I couldn't do this much longer. The next day I told Mark. "I don't want to keep lying," I said. We were in his truck, windows fogged, hearts racing. He didn't flinch. "Then don't." "It's not that simple," I whispered. "I didn't say it was simple," he said, "but it's honest. And maybe that's what you need now." I looked at him, really looked at him. And the thing was, he wasn't pushing me. He wasn't asking for more than I could give. He was just there, solid, steady, waiting for me to decide. So I did. That weekend, I asked David if we could talk. We sat in the living room, the TV off for once. He looked tired. Or maybe just detached. "What is it?" he asked. "I need to be honest with you," I said, heart pounding. His eyes narrowed alert for the first time in weeks. "I've been seeing someone," I said, "and I know that's not something you can forgive. I don't expect you to. But I can't live like this anymore. I can't keep pretending we're okay when we haven't been for a long time." Silence. Then, "Is this about sex?" "No," I said firmly. "It's about feeling human again." He stood up, pacing the room. "Who is he?" "That doesn't matter. Do I know him?" "No." "Are you in love with him?" I hesitated. "I don't know," I said. "But I know I'm not in love with you anymore." That was the nail in the coffin. We didn't scream. We didn't fight. The conversation ended with a nod and an agreement to separate quietly. He packed a bag and stayed with a friend that night. I slept in our bed alone. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The days that followed were a strange mix of liberation and mourning. I cried. I laughed. I stared at the walls and wondered who I had become. But through it all, Mark was there. He didn't ask to move in. He didn't try to take over my life. He simply showed up when I needed groceries, when I broke down unexpectedly, when I couldn't sleep. He never tried to fix me. He just stayed beside me while I put myself back together. And slowly I began to feel whole again. We didn't rush into anything. We didn't call ourselves anything. We just were. And that was enough. One night, weeks later, we sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets, sipping wine. "I don't want to be your escape," he said quietly. "You're not," I replied. "You're the first real thing I've felt in years." He nodded, eyes on the stars. "I'm not perfect," he said. "Neither am I. But I'll never let you feel invisible again." And with those words, I let the last piece of my old life go. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe we'd last. Maybe we wouldn't. But I knew this: I had chosen myself. I had stepped out of the shadow of a life I was merely surviving. And I had found something I didn't think was possible anymore. Hope. He put down his equipment and started something I never saw coming. A true infidelity story. I once believed infidelity was black and white. You were either faithful or you weren't. You either loved someone or you didn't. But life, I've come to learn, doesn't play by such neat rules. What happened between Mark and me didn't begin with betrayal. It began with absence. It began with silence. It began with me sitting across from a man I had built a life with and realizing we no longer saw each other at all. Mark didn't just walk into my kitchen that day. He walked into a void I had been trying to ignore for years. And maybe it shouldn't have happened the way it did. Maybe I should have ended my marriage first. Maybe there was a different version of this story, cleaner, safer, easier. But this is the one that's true. And in its truth, I found something I hadn't felt in over a decade myself. I found the version of me who laughed too loudly, who wanted to be touched not out of obligation, but because she was wanted. I found the courage to speak up to admit I was unhappy to ask for something more. I won't say it was easy. Ending a marriage, even one that's been hollow for years, still hurts. But I no longer carry the weight of pretending. And with Mark, I've built something slower, softer, more honest. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever stared at your reflection and wondered where you went, please know this: you're not alone. You're not broken. And it's not too late to rewrite your story. What would you have done in my place? Would you have turned back, stayed silent? Or would you have reached for that moment of connection like I did? Share your truth in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful journey. Your voice matters here, and your story, whatever it looks like, is worth telling.